my words be like your words spoken to the prophet Isaiah. As the rain and snow come down from heaven, do not return to it without watering the earth, making it bud and flourish so that it yields seed for the sower, and bread for the eater. So it is with the words that go out from my mouth. They will not return to me empty, but will accomplish what I desire and achieve the purposes for which I sent them. Amen. Old Testament lesson is from the book of Exodus. Now Joseph and all his brothers and all that generation died. But the Israelites became exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly and increased in numbers. Became so numerous that the land was filled with them. Then a new king, to whom Joseph meant nothing, came to power in Egypt. Look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. We must deal with them shrewdly. Otherwise, they may continue to multiply, and if war breaks out, they will join with our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they set slave masters over them to oppress them with harsh labor. And they built Pithom and Ramsey as storehouses for the Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and became more numerous. So the Egyptians made their lives bitter with harsh labor and worked them ruthlessly with bricks and mortars. And in the fields, and all their harsh labor, they worked them ruthlessly. Then Pharaoh called the Egyptian midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah. He said to them, when you are helping a Hebrew woman during childbirth on the delivery stool, if you see the child as a boy, kill it. If it's a girl, let her live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as Pharaoh had told them. They let the boys live. Then the Pharaoh summoned the midwives and said to them, why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live? The midwives answered, well, Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrived. So the Lord was kind to the midwives, and the Israelites became more numerous. And since the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh said to all his people, every Hebrew boy that is born, you must throw into the Nile. Let the girls live. Now, a man from the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman. She became pregnant, had a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. When she could no longer hide him, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. She placed him in it and set him among the reeds along the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her female attendants were with her, walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds, and she sent her female slave to fetch it. She brought it to her. She opened it and saw the baby inside. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. His sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, shall I go get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the child for you? Yes, go, she said. So the daughter went and got the child's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, take the child and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So his mother took him and nursed him. When he grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. This is the story of our people. New Testament lessons from the Gospel of Matthew. Now the Pharisees and Sadducees came to Jesus and to test him by asking him to show them a sign from heaven. He said, you say in the evening that it will be fair weather because the sky is red. In the morning, you say it will be stormy because the sky is red and overcast. He said, you know how to interpret the appearance of the sky, but you do not know how to interpret the signs of the times. An evil, wicked, and adulterous generation asks for a sign, but none will be given to it, except the sign of Jonah. Then Jesus left them and went away. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he said to his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? They said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, still others say Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. What about you, Jesus said? Who do you say that I am? Simon Peter said, you are the Messiah, the Son of the living God. Jesus said, blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah. For this has not been revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven. And you are now Peter. And on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it. I will give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Then he told his disciples not to tell anyone he was the Messiah. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Questions? And the questions change over time. When we were young, and I bet you hear this, we couldn't ask them fast enough. Why is the sky blue? Do you want to see how high I can jump? Why does Daddy have to go to work? Why do I have to eat broccoli? Then somebody else asks us questions, and they get tougher. Where was the Declaration of Independence signed? What's the difference between an adjective and an adverb? How many cups in a quart? What were the reasons for the Civil War? And as we age, we may start asking questions to ourselves. And these can be really tough. Not the ones like, where did I leave my keys? But, am I happy in my job? Was there something else I should have done with my life? Why does God allow evil? Today's gospel story is built around two questions that Jesus asked of his disciples. One relatively easy question and one much more difficult. And we know there are different types of questions. Some are really easy, like, who is buried in Grant's tomb? Okay. Some are tougher. Where is Grant's tomb?
In the cemetery.
Actually, it's not. It's all by itself. Some questions are tricky, even if they're not meant to be. I have a daily trivia question that comes up on my phone. And recently, the question was, listen carefully, which state has the most Ivy League schools? And it's multiple choice. The possible answers were New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts, and Philadelphia. When it comes to the tough questions, we need to be prepared for answers that we may not like or even understand. In the classic novel To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus, the father, who is defending a black man on an assault charge against a white girl in Alabama in the 1930s, tells his daughter, you never ask a question to somebody on the witness stand to which you don't already know the answer. But if the human race didn't ask questions, we'd still be in the Stone Age. Indira Gandhi is quoted as saying, the power to question is the basis of all human progress. It seems Jesus is in a rather pensive mood. We say that we believe he is fully God, but also fully human. At what point in his life did he realize for sure who he was? Or was it not until he realized that for him, death's door swung both ways? In the chapters preceding today's story, his relative, John the Baptist, has been murdered by Herod. And Jesus has performed some of his most well-known miracles, the feeding of the 5,000, walking on water, and then for good measure, feeding of the 4,000. But as he and his disciples try to flee the limelight for a while, they withdrew to the area of Caesarea Philippi, away from the Jewish areas of Palestine. On the way, he is accosted by a group of Pharisees and Sadducees. They have been hearing about him, watching him, and plotting to get rid of him. They have been setting traps for him, trying to get him to say something blasphemous or do something sinful so they have him arrested and get him out of their way. It may speak to the waves that Jesus is creating for the religious hierarchy that the Pharisees and Sadducees team up on him. Although we tend to group them together, they were polar opposites. Think of the Sunni and Shiite Muslims, or Nazis and communists, or liberals and conservatives. The only thing they had in common was distrust of, disgust of, and wanting to be rid of Jesus. They ask him for a sign. They want to know who he is. What are his credentials? And that in and of itself is a fair question. Don't we ask to see credentials? When somebody comes to your house purporting to be from the cable company or the gas company, don't we want to see their ID badge? Or why does the doctor or the dentist or the accountant have their diplomas framed on the wall? But you would think if the Pharisees and Sadducees had been paying attention, they would have already seen more than enough signs to prove that Jesus was from God. So Jesus quotes what must be a similar to saying to what we say, red sky at night, sailor's delight, and on. He tells them they can read the signs of nature, and they ought to be able to interpret the signs of the times. But he's not the type of the Messiah that they are looking for. So he tosses a few insults their way and keeps moving. Once they reach their destination, I can picture the 12 sitting around the campfire with Jesus, just chatting, when Jesus comes off with the first easy question. Who do people say that I am? You can picture like a class of first graders all trying to get the teacher's attention. All the arms go up at once. John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah, and probably many others not recorded. And they have answered that question correctly. They've heard the scuttlebutt, the murmuring, the word on the street. They don't have to think or stick their necks out. He hasn't put them on the spot yet. And it would have been possible for any of those heavy hitters of our faith to be confused with Jesus. Elijah, perhaps the greatest of the Old Testament prophets, was to return before the Messiah. To this day, Jewish families still set a place for him at their Passover dinner. And John the Baptist, fresh in everybody's mind, may have been credited as great enough to come back from the dead. And for Jesus to be identified with Jeremiah or any of the other great prophets was no insult. It would have been seen by most as an honor. The perception of the people being reported by the disciples is no different than the way we perceive things. We may observe something and we see what we want to see. That's how every year somebody shoots a doe in buck season and later swears that he saw antlers. Or we may only see or hear what we allow ourselves to. We may tune out all the negative words or reported words of a favored politician, for instance, and focus only on the words that fit our own philosophy. Or we may only see what we expect to see. If a new traffic light is installed where there hadn't been one before, or if trains start using a track they haven't used for years, well, we just didn't see it. They wanted to see a Messiah. But over the centuries, there have been so many false ones that the people weren't willing to jump on the bandwagon. And it's hard to blame the people or even the religious leaders for not seeing Jesus for who he was. What would our reaction be today to somebody who claims to be God? We'd shrug it off. We'd say, yeah, right, another kook. Then Jesus asked the tough question. This is the one that makes each of the 12 look inside themselves. But what about you? Who do you say that I am? There's not a lot of wiggle room here. They've been with him on the road for a couple of years, ate with him, traveled with him, seen the miracles, heard the teachings, but I'll bet they didn't answer this question as fast as they did the first one. If I pulled one of you aside after the service and asked you, what do they say about me as a speaker? You might say, well, I've heard them say that, you talk too fast, or you move around too much, or you don't know your material, or you don't seem too prepared. You probably wouldn't be too uncomfortable reporting the words of others. But if I ask you, what do you think about me? I'll bet there might be an uncomfortable silence. I'm sure that was the response of the 12. They're going to make sure they say the right thing, or nothing at all. Better keep silent and make it look like you're thinking than to open your mouth and say something foolish, which of course has never kept Peter from speaking. This time he gets it right. He blurts out, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." It took guts to say that. If it were true, it would blow the lid off of everything. If it weren't true, Peter could be stoned to death for blasphemy. But he said it anyway. And I imagine for a split second, Peter thought to himself, uh-oh, did I just put my foot in my mouth? But Jesus congratulates Peter on his insight. How blessed you are, Jesus tells him. And then he explains to them that this revelation has been from the Father, that they wouldn't have been expected to know this with their own minds and experience, even given that they have known Jesus well for some time. Which makes me wonder why Jesus had insulted the religious leaders who also had not been able to read the signs. Peter's confession is not the first time that Jesus has been referred to in this way. At his baptism, God had pronounced, "This is my son." The woman at the well had asked her fellow Samaritan villagers, "Could this be the Messiah?" To which they responded once they had met him, "We know that this man is the Savior of the world." Earlier in Matthew's account, even demons address him as the Son of God. Then it seems as if Jesus sets Peter aside for a special privilege and responsibility. Jesus tells Peter, who prior to this was known by his Jewish name of Simon, that he is to be called Peter, which is from the root form of rock in Greek. And then with a play in words, Jesus announces that on this rock, on this man, I will build my church, and he will have the keys to the kingdom. This has caused theological divisions over the centuries. The Roman Catholic Church reads this to mean that Peter is the head of the church, the first pope, and that authority is passed down from one pope to another. Protestants read it that the faith of Peter is the foundation of the church. And as an aside, this passage is one of only 2 mentions in the entire Bible of the word church. Both dogmas miss the point to a degree. Peter, or his faith, may be the foundation of the church, but Jesus says this is the rock on which I will build my church. The church in Marion Center, or Plumville, or even the Vatican, is not my church, or your church, or their church. It is Christ's church. You know, some of you may be familiar on the road from Byer to Sagamore, Route 210. Up on the right, there's a non-denominational gospel church that's been there. The cemeteries are there, and it's been there for years. And for many years, it was pastored by a local, good, nice guy by the name of Reed Blystone. And if you give directions around that area, say, well, you know where Reed Blystone's church is? Sorry, it's not Reed Blystone's church. It's Christ's church. Jesus ends the discussion by instructing the disciples not to tell anyone. Shortly after this passage is a story of the Transfiguration, when he again warns them to tell nobody, not at least until he's raised from the dead. At that point, they, and by extension, we, are to spread the word for the entire world. When we look inside ourselves and hear Jesus ask us the same question that he asks his closest friends, how do we answer? And assuming that we answer with the same enthusiasm that Peter did, can we honestly say that it makes a difference in our lives? Or do we just pay lip service? Who do you say that I am? Our answer tells us a lot about him, and even more about us. Thanks be to God.
Thank you for letting us share our worship service with you today. We invite you to join us in person next Sunday at 10:30, or if you prefer, to listen online Sunday afternoon. If you would like to make a donation, please visit our website at www.marionpress.org and click the Donate Now button. May God bless you and have a great week.